The house stood silent around me, the walls I built with my own hands, now feeling cold and unfamiliar. I paused at the entrance, heart heavy with the weight of years, the sacrifices pressed into every beam. Then his voice cut through the quiet. Richard's voice, sharp and dismissive. "Get out of my way, old man." There was no warmth, no respect, only a cold edge that sliced through me as if I were a stranger. I swallowed the lump rising in my throat, steadying my breath. "Richard," I said quietly, my voice barely above a whisper, hoping to reach whatever remained of the son I once knew. But he looked past me, eyes flickering with disdain and entitlement. His hand shot out, pushing the door hard enough to slam it closed with a harsh finality. The sound echoed like a verdict. Silence followed, heavy and unforgiving, filling the space where gratitude and love should have lived. My heart clenched, but I held still. Years of endurance had taught me to steady my anger, to hold back the shouts and tears when they would do no good. Instead, I felt a cold resolve settle deep inside, beneath the sting of his rejection. I turned away from the door, tracing the rough wood with my fingers as the bitter truth sank in. All those late nights working double shifts, scrimping and sacrificing to afford this home. The sleepless nights worried more about Richard's future than my own health. Had it come to this? A harsh dismissal, a severing of the invisible bond that held us together. Outside, the world went on obliviously, cars passing, neighbors chatting behind fences. But inside me, memories rushed like a river. The mortgage signed in worn ink, the tools I pawned to keep the lights on, the illnesses I ignored because family came first. Each memory was a thread unraveling the fabric of a life devoted to building something lasting, only to have it disrespected. Yet alongside that ache, a new thought sparked, a quiet, sharp promise forming in the depths of my mind. This contempt was not the end. It was a rupture to be mended by strength, a challenge to be met with every ounce of patience and cunning I possessed. Richard might forget the sacrifices, but I had not forgotten the worth of what I had built. A few tears escaped, tracing lines over weathered skin. Not tears of defeat, but of mourning, the grief of a father betrayed by his own son. As they fell, so did the last shreds of submission. I straightened my back and took a slow breath filled with determination. The road ahead was dark and uncertain, but I stepped into it without hesitation. This house, this legacy, was no longer just walls and timber. It was a battlefield. And I was no longer the man who had stood silently at a slammed door. I was a force gathering strength, a storm ready to rise. I found myself seeking refuge in the quiet corner of a small cafe I used to visit years ago, back when life still held a simpler promise. The clamoring world outside moved on without me, but inside, amidst the clinking of porcelain cups, and the gentle murmur of conversations, I was alone with my thoughts, turning every memory over like a fragile piece of glass that could shatter at the slightest pressure. I ordered a black coffee, its bitter aroma reminding me of those long, sleepless nights spent drafting blueprints under dim lights. The flavor was stark, unforgiving, much like the reality I now faced. I took a seat by the window and stared out, the afternoon sun casting pale patterns over the worn wood of the table. It was here, in this quiet bubble, that I began to sift through the wreckage of my life's work, attempting to understand how it had come to this bitter fracture. The years peeled back one by one, revealing the sacrifices that had become the foundation of the home we lived in, the home Richard now rejected like a castaway. I saw myself in those memories, a younger man with a back bent by labor, calloused hands and aching joints, driven by a fierce determination to provide for my family no matter the cost. I remembered the time I took on double shifts at the construction site after my own health began to falter. Pneumonia had gripped me hard one winter, but I refused to stay bedridden. There were bills to pay, and more importantly, a future to secure for Richard. I pictured his small face, full of dreams, and the pride I felt sending him off to college. But that pride was now a wound that throbbed with fresh pain. There was that painful evening when the mortgage notice arrived thicker than usual. The home was barely paid for, but instead of despair, I felt a surge of determination. I pawned my old engineering tools, the very instruments that had built my career, to scrape together an extra payment. Those worn-out blueprints had earned us this house, but more than bricks and mortar, they represented everything I had sacrificed. The ache in my chest tightened as I thought of the nights I set aside my own ailments. My arthritis flared unrelenting, and the doctor warned me to slow down. But slowing down was a luxury I could not afford. Every ache was a price paid so Richard might have a future, yet now he treated me as if I were a burden. The contrast between the warmth of those years and Richard's current contempt was like a cruel joke. I had imagined a retirement filled with peaceful moments, celebrations of a life well lived and shared. Instead, I was left with a fractured family and a house filled with cold silence. Despite this, my mind refused to collapse into despair. Among the memories of hardship, a spark ignited, a simmering resolve that this betrayal would not be the final word. I reminded myself of the qualities that defined me beyond the role of a father: my patience, my intellect, the strategic thinking honed over a lifetime managing complex engineering projects. I was no stranger to problems that seemed insurmountable, nor to navigating the intricate pathways of legal contracts and financial statements. This was not just an emotional wound, it was a challenge that called for a measured response. I pictured Richard's sharp tongue, his impatience, his sense of entitlement, all symptoms of someone who took, without understanding, what had been given. But I was not broken, only tested. The cafe walls, lined with dusty photographs and the faded glint of old-world charm, seemed to hold their breath as I plotted the first steps in my mind. My experience gave me tools beyond physical strength, the ability to analyze, to plan, to act with precision. As I warmed my hands on the chipped ceramic cup, I considered my assets, both tangible and intangible. The home itself was wrapped in layers of legal documents and financial arrangements, some still overlooked, some too complex for an untrained eye. Those decades managing public projects had forced me to understand every clause, every stipulation that could tip scales in an argument. I thought of the lawyer I trusted from years past, a man with the patience of a monk and the mind of an eagle. I could call on him if needed. There was also Carla, an old friend and accountant whose sharpness in numbers was unmatched. Together, they could help me navigate the labyrinth of the estate and finances. But first, I had to understand the full picture. The easy days of trusting Richard to act honorably were behind me. I needed clarity, evidence, control. Each piece of the puzzle, each forgotten detail, could become a sword or shield in this unfolding war. My reflection in the window caught my eye. An older man, lines etched deeply into my face, eyes tired but burning with purpose. The kindness that had shaped my life would not vanish, but it had to be tempered now with vigilance. Forgiveness was not on the table, not yet. Before any of that came, justice had to be restored, and treachery repaid in full. The cafe's quiet was punctuated by the soft scrape of a chair pulled back. I looked up as a waitress passed by, her smile polite but curious. I returned a simple nod. Behind that quiet exterior, the wheels in my mind turned ever faster. This was no longer about survival. It was about reclaiming what was mine, protecting the legacy I had built one careful step at a time. Outside, the afternoon light faded toward evening, casting long shadows through the glass. But inside, my resolve grew stronger with each passing moment, fueled by the vivid contrast between sacrifice and ingratitude, between love given and betrayal received. The battle was only beginning, and in that stillness, I prepared myself for the journey ahead, a journey fueled by pain, but driven by a fierce, unyielding hope. The faint ringing of my phone broke the fragile silence I had been holding on to in the solitude of my study. My fingers hesitated before reaching for it, a small part of me dreading what I might hear, and yet needing to know. The caller ID displayed Richard's name. The knot in my stomach tightened. I braced myself as I answered. "Dad," his voice was sharp, impatient as usual. "We need to talk about the estate. I want more money, and I want it now." A cold pulse ran through me. More money? After all I had done, the years I spent holding us together through every hardship, he sounded like a stranger, a man driven only by greed. I swallowed hard, but kept my voice steady. "Richard, whatever you think you deserve, it isn't something you can demand without respect or fairness." He laughed shortly, the sound bitter. "You don't get it, do you? The estate is mine as much as yours. I'm entitled to what I want. I'm not a kid to be ignored." I felt the old familiar fire rise inside me, but this time it did not consume me. Instead, it sharpened my focus. "I've been going over the documents and the finances. There are irregularities that concern me, Richard. I need to see every detail you've been managing." His silence throbbed on the other end for a moment, then the voice returned clipped and defensive. "You don't have to know everything. This is my business too." "No, it's not," I said, my tone colder now. "Not when it comes to the family's future and what we've built. I'm in control until I say otherwise." The line went dead. I stared at the silent phone, heart pounding with a mix of anger and realization. Richard hadn't just grown selfish. He had crossed a line I dreaded but had to confront, falsifying documents. My mind raced back to a small hint I'd caught earlier, a discrepancy in the financial statements, a loan application that didn't seem quite right. Had he been manipulating paperwork, claiming more ownership than he had the right to? The thought made my blood turn cold. This was no longer just disrespect, this was fraud. Betrayal crossed into criminal territory, and if I was to protect everything I had poured my heart into, I had to act, not with brute force, but with the quiet precision of a man who had spent his life studying structures and systems, spotting weaknesses and exploiting flaws. I pulled out the thick binder on the old mahogany desk where I had begun organizing our family's affairs. Every paper, every contract, every financial statement had been carefully filed, but now it was time to sift through them with a finer eye, to uncover what Richard had hidden beneath the surface. The hours slipped away as I pored over the documents. The design engineer in me approached the problem like a complex blueprint. Where did the supports hold? Where were the cracks? I found entries that didn't add up, expenses claimed that never matched bank statements, altered receipts, and unauthorized credit lines opened in our name. A tangled web of deceit, carefully woven and audaciously hidden. My hands trembled with a mixture of fury and determination. The foundation of trust between us was crumbling, and I was left standing amid the ruins. But I refused to be the victim here. Years of solving engineering problems under pressure had trained my mind to think several steps ahead, to plan with both patience and precision. I made notes, drew diagrams, and catalogued each misstep like a forensic investigator reconstructing a case. The details would become my arsenal, but to wield it effectively, I needed allies, experts who could confirm my findings and bolster my case with authority. The first person who came to mind was Martin, a lawyer whose courtroom prowess was matched only by his quiet wisdom. I had met him during a building permit dispute years ago. He was a man of few words but possessed a mind like a steel trap, known for dismantling even the most complicated cases, piece by piece. Next was Carla, the accountant who had been a friend for nearly 3 decades. Meticulous and sharp, Carla had managed the books of several projects I'd led, able to spot discrepancies invisible to the untrained eye. If anyone could verify the financial irregularities and expose them legally, it was her. With a plan taking shape, I picked up the phone again. this time to call Martin. His voice was reassuring on the other end, steady and calm, like the foundation of a well-designed structure. "Harold, whatever you're facing, we'll handle it. No bluff, no wasted moves. We'll build a case that leaves Richard no room to maneuver." Next, Carla answered with her usual warmth, but quickly focused as I explained the situation. "Send me everything you have. I'll scrutinize the numbers with a fine-tooth comb. We'll find how deep the rabbit hole goes and prepare for the next steps." Their support steadied me, but with the foundation shaking beneath my feet, I realized something vital. This battle was not just about money or property. It was about justice, respect, and restoring the dignity I repeatedly sacrificed to protect my family. Richard's greed was a threat that could destroy all of that. That night in my dimly lit study, I sat alone, papers scattered like the fragments of my trust. The silence was broken only by the ticking of an old clock, marking time as I resolved not to be a passive victim. It was clear now. No more staying silent, no more bowing to entitlement cloaked in blood ties. I could feel the weight of every hard-fought year pressing down, but it no longer crushed me. Instead, it formed the bedrock beneath a mind sharpened by decades of experience. I was ready to confront this betrayal, armed not with rage, but with the kind of precise, calculated strategy that had guided every project I ever led. Richard had made his demands, cast his threats. Now it was my turn to respond, not as a desperate father, but as a guardian of a legacy, wielding intelligence and endurance as my greatest weapons. This was no longer just a family dispute. It was a reckoning, and I would meet it head-on. The days that followed drew me deep into a relentless cycle of quiet focus, each moment spent unraveling the tangled threads woven into the family estate and finances. The peaceful solitude I had briefly found in the cafe seemed like a distant dream now, replaced by a pressing urgency to defend what decades of sweat and sacrifice had built. Morning after morning, I returned to the pile of ancient papers. Contracts yellowed with age, bank statements painstakingly kept, legal documents layered like sediment. Each page carried weight, a solemn testament to years of toil, but now they also held the potential to either shield me from ruin or be the weapon that brought Richard to justice. Alongside me, Martin and Carla became pillars of strength and precision, their expertise transforming my mounting frustration into actionable strategy. We began with the foundations, sifting through every record from the earliest property purchase to the most recent bank transaction. I approached the ledgers as I once had blueprints, seeking fracture points, uncovering hidden stress, scanning for minute inconsistencies that might reveal structural failure. Carla's analytical voice, calm and precise, was a lifeline through the sea of numbers. "Harold, Richard's financial behavior is reckless and secretive. He's taken out loans without your knowledge, manipulated accounts, perhaps even forged signatures. These debts aren't just burdens, they're cracks spread across the family's legacy. We have to act fast." The reality hit me harder than I expected. It was as if the very ground beneath me was crumbling, hollowed out by greed that threatened to swallow everything I had painstakingly built. Yet beneath the sting of betrayal, a fierce determination ignited, a resolve to rebuild, to fortify what was left, and to reclaim what was mine. One brisk morning, Martin arrived unannounced, his steady presence a balm to my turmoil. We gathered in the study, a room where blueprint scrolls mingled uneasily with the stark printouts of financial records, a strange contrast of past hopes and current crises. "We hold firm legal footing," Martin assured me, leafing through folders. "There's clear evidence of misrepresentation and forgery. We can request an injunction immediately, freeze Richard's access to all joint accounts, halt any transactions he attempts. From there, we petition the court to restrict his management of family assets." With each carefully chosen phrase, a plan took shape. Legal motions to halt further damage, audits to expose the truth, damage control to secure the remaining structure. I listened intently, absorbing every detail, knowing a rushed or clumsy step could cause everything to collapse. This was no longer a matter of blood or emotion. It required the dispassionate rigor of an engineer rebuilding a failing bridge. That evening, I spoke with Carla to set the wheels in motion. Prepare the comprehensive financial reports. We need indisputable documentation for court proceedings. Every entry, every anomaly must be accounted for. Consider it done, her voice was resolute. We'll trace every cent and uncover every lie. No, the following weeks were a delicate dance of appearing calm while pulling strings behind the scenes. Each of Richard's intermittent calls I met with measured civility, careful to reveal little and glean much. Joint credit cards were cancelled quietly, automatic payments redirected under my sole authority. Deeds and titles were reviewed, fortified with additional legal protections. Richard's frustration was audible in scant, terse messages, snide remarks and barely veiled threats, but none of it rattled me. Years of enduring hardship had forged patience and resolve into an unbreakable shield. I was no longer the man crushed by betrayal. I was a strategist, wielding meticulous, deliberate power. The house itself, once alive with memories and warmth, had morphed under my gaze. The study, where my weary hands now fought this unseen battle, felt like a command center. Stacks of legal documents and financial audits replaced photo albums and mementos. The faint scent of old paper mingled with lingering dust, underscoring the distance traveled from the carefree days of family life to a cold battlefield. More than once, I found myself sitting in the muted glow of lamplight, the quiet punctuated only by the ticking of the old clock I once thought timeless. My fingers traced the edges of some of the blueprints, reminders that, like any great structure, family depended on a strong foundation. And just as no building could survive without reinforcement, this fractured family required repair. A fortification not just of material walls, but of trust and accountability. Confrontation came sooner than I had anticipated. One evening, under a burning sun dipping below the horizon, Richard appeared at the doorstep unannounced. His eyes, once boyish and eager, now blazed with anger and desperation. We faced each other in the foyer, the space thick with unspoken accusation and lingering pain. "You don't understand, Dad," he snarled. "You're tearing this family apart. You think you're in control, but you'll regret this. You're making a huge mistake." I returned his glare steadily, my voice cool and even. "I'm not the one who broke the trust, Richard. Your choices brought us here. Now it's time to face their consequences." He stormed away, slamming the door with a force meant to shatter, but I felt nothing but reinforced resolve. The broken pieces within me had hardened into a steady wall. Behind the scenes, Martin pressed forward with legal filings. Each motion was a pillar reinforcing my case. Motions to freeze accounts, petitions to curtail Richard's authority, requests for subpoenas to compel disclosure of documents. Depositions were written with painstaking care, affidavits sworn and meticulously verified. Carla translated the financial chaos into undeniable evidence, assigning every irregularity a place and purpose. My life transformed into a dual existence. By day, I navigated the quiet halls of the house, each footstep measured, cautious. By night, I was a detective and a draftsman in a grand design of legal warfare, stitching together facts and figures with a craftsman's precision. Gradually, I saw the toll of our efforts in Richard's crumbling facade. He was no longer the confident heir demanding his due. His confidence cracked like failing plaster under the weight of mounting evidence. His brow furrowed in confusion and fear, his once unassailable arrogance wavering. Neighbors began to notice the change as well. Whispers of the quiet storm swirled around the block. The man who had once seemed broken now carried a new air of controlled strength. They saw the shifting shadows behind his eyes, but didn't hear the secrets buried in numbers and legal filings. Amid the mounting tension, I often sat near the window at day's end, watching sky hues fade from brilliant gold to bruised purple. My thoughts circled the notion that this struggle was more than financial. It was about dignity, about restoring respect that had been eroded by greed and entitlement. The fight to reclaim lost honor, to rebuild a fractured legacy, filled me with a quiet purpose deeper than any anger. Months passed in this Cold War, each move carefully orchestrated, each victory small but crucial. I was no longer the father silenced by betrayal. I was a guardian, standing watch over a heritage that refused to fall. This long game demanded patience and strength, qualities I had cultivated for a lifetime. Every legal proceeding, every frozen dollar, every uncovered lie was like a brick laid into a new foundation, stronger, more resilient than before. As I worked, I became the architect of a structure not merely built with timber and nails, but with justice and resolve. Richard's reckoning was no longer a distant threat. It loomed closer with every documented fraud, every restricted asset, every silent courtroom whispered promise. In those quiet moments, gazing out as darkness settled over the land I had fought to preserve, I told myself this: I would rebuild, stronger, wiser, unyielding. No more a man broken at a slammed door, but a force rising steady and sure against the tide of betrayal. The first rays of light filtered softly through the curtains, painting the room in gentle hues of amber and grey. But within me, the war waged on. Since the day I began restricting Richard's access to our joint finances, every moment had been charged with a quiet intensity. What had once been a home filled with strained silences and swallowed resentments now felt like a fortress under constant siege, a space where every quietly decisive move reshaped the balance of power. With Martin and Carla orchestrating meticulously from their respective fields of expertise, my role had shifted from passive sufferer to active strategist. The joint credit cards bearing Richard's name were cancelled without fanfare. Automatic payments rerouted to accounts under my sole control. Bank authorities alerted to any suspicious activity. Each transaction reversed or frozen was a small victory, cutting deep into the control Richard once wielded with such smug entitlement. This was no reckless reaction, but a carefully measured campaign, carved out with the patience and precision born of decades spent managing complex projects where every detail could mean the difference between collapse and endurance. Yet, even as I severed these financial ties, I maintained an exterior of calm. Richard's calls, often burning with frustration and thinly veiled threats, I answered with quiet, steady resolve. "These actions are necessary," I told him once, voice steady despite the turmoil beneath. "The estate is not yours to squander, and until trust is restored, protection is mandatory." His retorts became fewer, edged with desperation. "You're killing me with this, Dad. You don't have to be the judge and jailer." "But I will," I replied simply, knowing full well the gravity of what we both faced. This was no longer a fight of wills, but a battle for survival, of legacy, dignity, and justice. Within the study's walls, now transformed from a room of quiet reflection into my command center, the hum of the computer and the scratch of pen on paper set the backdrop for my days. Carla's tireless audits exposed layer after layer of mismanagement. Unauthorized loans, forged documents, falsified receipts. Each revelation clarified the extent of the damage, exposing a reckless, dangerous misuse of funds that threatened to strip away everything I'd built. Martin's legal maneuvers anchored our defense. Half a continent away, or just across town, he filed injunctions, petitions, and motions designed to freeze Richard's assets, limit his control over properties, and open doors for exposing the full scope of his deception in court. These actions were methodical, deliberate, never rushed, always precise. The confrontations with Richard became less wild, more calculated, his anger simmering into thinly disguised pleas. On a wintry evening, just as a muted snow began to dust the lawn, he showed up at the front door, his gaze sharp, yet tinged with vulnerability. "Dad, please," he implored, voice cracked with frustration. "We can fix this together. You don't have to go to war with me." I met his gaze with a quiet strength, born of years slowed by broken promises. "This isn't war," I said softly. "This is justice, and trust, once shattered, is not easily mended." His shoulders sagged, a mixture of defeat and anger. The door slammed behind him, the sound heavy with the weight of all our fractured history, but I remained unmoved. Outside our private battles, the neighborhood began to whisper about the man who had weathered terrible storms and was now rising with quiet but undeniable strength. No longer the defeated patriarch, I became a figure of calm authority, a silent storm-gathering power. Yet each victory required vigilance. Every legal motion, every frozen account carried risk. The slightest misstep could unravel months of work. I was painfully aware of the fragility beneath this growing fortress. Often, I found refuge by the fireplace I had built decades ago. Its worn stones, a symbol of fortitude. The flames danced, flickering shadows onto walls, lined with memories both bitter and sweet. Sitting there, the weight of years pressed into my bones, I reflected on the long journey from sacrifice to resurgence. Each piece of evidence, every financial discrepancy exposed, was another brick added to a new foundation, one built not merely from wood and nails, but from the unyielding pursuit of justice. I was no longer a man crushed by betrayal, but a craftsman rebuilding what was broken. Richard's confidence eroded with every court proceeding, every restricted asset, every document that exposed his misdeeds. He was no longer the entitled heir demanding his share. He was a man cornered by the truth. In the quiet, I found peace. This was not vengeance, it was restoration. It was about reclaiming dignity stolen by greed and entitlement. This battle demanded patience, endurance, the very virtues I had cultivated over a lifetime. Each small victory fortified me, each setback taught me resilience. I was no longer a man silenced by a slammed door. I was a storm rising steadily, a guardian standing resolute over the legacy I had sworn to protect. The path was long, fraught with uncertainty, but beneath it all was an unshakable promise. I would rebuild, stronger, wiser, and unyielding. The morning air was thick with quiet anticipation as I entered the courthouse that day, a silent arena where years of pain, sacrifice, and betrayal would finally find their reckoning. The sterile walls and cold fluorescent lights offered no comfort. Instead, they seemed to magnify the tension settling heavily in my chest. Across the polished table sat Richard, his face guarded with a defiant mask that barely concealed the cracks beneath. The distance between us was more than physical. It was the sum of decades of shattered trust, broken promises, and unspoken resentments. As the mediation began, I felt the weight of every moment stretching underneath the silence, each glance exchanged, every measured breath laden with the ghosts of our shared past. Martin, my steadfast ally throughout this ordeal, opened the proceedings with unshakable precision. The evidence laid before the court was meticulous. Bank statements marked with forged signatures, loans taken without authorization, expenses falsified beyond mere oversight. Each document was a brick laid firmly upon the foundation of truth we had tirelessly built, leaving no room for doubt or denial. I watched as the room absorbed this cascade of facts, like a tide gradually eroding the walls of deception Richard had constructed. The arrogance he once wielded like armor began to falter, replaced by a fragile veneer of desperation. His confident voice cracked under the weight of undeniable proof, and I caught fleeting moments of hesitation, ghosts of remorse, perhaps, or the dawning realization of lost ground. When my turn arrived, I did not speak of vengeance or anger. Instead, I recounted a lifetime of sacrifice, the cold mornings at construction sites, working double shifts while my body ached, the nights I pawned tools to keep the house standing, my own ailments ignored to provide for my family. I spoke calmly, with the clarity of a man bearing his soul without bitterness, revealing a narrative of endurance, of hope, and of love, betrayed but unbroken. The courtroom held its breath. Richard's protest dwindled as the truth settled firmly over us. Faces once filled with skepticism softened with understanding. The mediators, impartial yet perceptive, weighed the scales with care. Richard's defenses, once loud and brazen, became whispers of excuse, vanishing under scrutiny. At one point the rawness of reality overcame him. His gaze dropped, shoulders sagging under the burden of his own undoing. The room was silent, but for the soft murmur of papers and the echoes of a long-silenced courage finally spoken aloud. The final verdict struck like the closing of a heavy door. Richard was stripped of all claims to the estate and assets he had so recklessly tried to seize. The court imposed restrictions on his access, ensuring that the remaining legacy would be protected from further harm. The public record, now marked by his fraud, shattered the reputation he had clung to, a just result born from months of patient struggle. As I rose with the ruling pronounced, relief washed over me, tempered by an ache for the son I had lost to greed and impatience. It was justice served without violence, a recognition of betrayal met with dignity and strength. No triumph in petty revenge, only the restoration of order where chaos had threatened. The walk out of the courthouse was slow and reflective. The weight of the battle lingered, but beneath it, a fragile peace had taken root. The echoes of confrontation softened, replaced by the quiet promise of rebuilding. Returning home was like stepping into a sanctuary reclaimed. The familiar walls, once vessels of broken dreams, welcomed me back with silent strength. The house was no longer just a structure. It was a living memory, a symbol of endurance over adversity. That night, seated by the fireplace whose stones I had laid with my own hands, I allowed the crackling warmth to fill the room and the emptiness I had felt for too long. The dancing flames cast shadows on the walls, flickering scenes of past joys and sacrifices interwoven with the present resolve. Loneliness still lingered at the edges, but it was softened by a peace born of hard-won truth and justice. This was no surrender. It was a quiet triumph, a reclamation of dignity stolen, but not lost. I pledged silently and with unshakable determination to protect this legacy, not merely the home or assets, but the enduring spirit of devotion and resilience that had founded it. The court had spoken, but the true work would continue in the quiet moments, the rebuilding, the healing, the living. I was no longer a man defeated by betrayal or shut out by slammed doors. I was reshaped by trial, stronger and wiser. The future remained uncertain, but beneath my every step lay a foundation solidified by justice and vigilance. This was my home, my legacy, my life redefined, and I would guard it with all the resolve a heart tempered by fire can hold, building anew on ground stained but never broken. The house rested in a deep, tranquil silence that night, a silence that folded around me like an old cloak, worn yet comforting. Settled by the fireplace, its glow casting gentle flickers against the stonework I had laid so many years ago, I felt the weight of all that had passed us. Every crack and scar in those stones told stories, stories of labor, hope, sacrifice, and now, survival. Despite the quiet peace, a faint loneliness lingered at the corners of the room, subtle but persistent, like a shadow stretching just beyond the firelight. It was a reminder of what had been lost, the relationship severed by greed and betrayal, the son who could have been but no longer was. Still, that loneliness was tempered by something far stronger, a profound sense of peace, won through enduring hardships that tested every fiber of my being. My fingers traced the smooth arms of the chair, worn from years of use and countless evenings like this one. Memories flooded through me, long nights hunched over blueprints, the relentless pounding of hammers, the sacrifices swallowed in silence to ensure a future for my family. These memories were the bricks upon which this home stood, a foundation far deeper than stone or mortar. I understood now that while I had lost much, I had not lost everything. This house, this legacy, was more than the sum of its parts. Its true strength lay in resilience, the unyielding spirit embedded within every beam and every heartbeat. And in that spirit, I found a well of strength to carry me forward. The flames flickered, casting shadows that danced like restless memories. They reminded me that even through devastation, light survives. It bends, twists, but never truly goes out. Much like the resolve burning within me. Justice had been served, not through vengeance, but through truth and persistence. No trophy of a shattered relationship could ever match the restoration of order and dignity achieved in the courts. Still, the real work was just beginning. Rebuilding happens not in grand gestures, but in quiet moments. The daily tending of wounds, the slow mending of what's been torn. It is found in the careful restoration of trust, the conscious choice to live beyond pain and betrayal. This house, my sanctuary, was a canvas waiting for those gentle strokes of renewal. Outside, life carried on with indifferent complacency. Neighbors unaware of the battles fought behind closed doors, but within these walls, amidst the sacred shadows and warmth of the fire, a new chapter quietly began. I was no longer the man diminished by betrayal or broken by slammed doors. I was a man remade, tempered by trial, fortified by wisdom. The path ahead was shrouded in uncertainty, but unlike before, I was grounded on a foundation forged by justice and vigilance. This home was more than a physical shelter. It was the embodiment of a lifetime's worth of endurance, sacrifice, and quiet heroism. It was my declaration that no force, no matter how dark, could dismantle what was built with unwavering resolve. As the fire's glow softened into the night stillness, I whispered a vow to guard this legacy with every ounce of strength left within me, to honor the sacrifices made, and to build anew from the ground, stained but never broken. Betrayal had exacted its toll and left scars, but it had not extinguished the flame. I would rise steady and sure, a guardian of what was pure and enduring, a legacy reclaimed by steadfast will, an unyielding heart, and the quiet power of hope reborn.